Okay, in this table it's showing some properties of metals and nonmetals. You look at the appearance, metals are shiny. Another word for that is they have a metallic luster. That's a scientific name for shiny. Whereas nonmetals are non-lustrous, or they are dull. As far as hardness goes, metals are generally very hard to hard, whereas nonmetals are brittle. If you hit them with a hammer, they tend to just crumble or shatter. Malleability is the ability to bend or to pound into thin sheets to shape. Metals are very malleable, whereas nonmetals are non-malleable. When you hit them with a hammer, they tend to just fracture. Ductility is the ability to make into a wire. Metals are very ductile, whereas nonmetals are not. Conduction of heat. Metals are very good conductors of heat. Nonmetals are poor conductors of heat. That's why you make pots and pans out of metal, because they conduct heat from your stove into your water to make your macaroni and cheese or whatever you're doing. Nonmetals are generally very poor conductors of heat. That's why you'll have a handle on your pot or pan that's either made of, and sometimes they're made of wood, or sometimes they're made of some kind of plastic material. It's so that you don't burn your hand. If the metal was if the handle was made of metal, it would conduct heat very readily. If you went to grab it, you'd burn your little hand. Conducting electricity. Metals are generally very good conductors of electricity. Why? Well, first off, electricity is nothing more than a stream of electrons flowing. If you look at metals, they tend to have very few valence electrons, usually 1 or 2, and they tend to want to get rid of them. So if you give a metal extra electrons, you're putting electrons on, let's say, copper metal. Copper's trying to get rid of its one lone valence electron anyway. And so if it's trying to get rid of one and you bring another one and put it on that atom, it's just going to pass it on to the next one. And it's going to pass it on to the one following it, so forth and so on. And that's how you have a current, or a stream of electrons, which is electricity. Nonmetals are generally very poor conductors of electricity. That's why electric cords are wrapped in plastic generally, because plastic is largely carbon atoms, carbon polymers, long chains of carbon atoms. And what happens when those atoms, when you put electrons on nonmetals, they tend to hold on to them. They tend to not pass them along. So they make insulators, is another word. As far as the states you find them in, metals are almost always solid at room temperature. Mercury would be one example of one that is a liquid at room temperature. And then gallium is another metal that has a melting point that's very close to room temperature. If you look at the nonmetals, a vast majority of them are gaseous, the ones outlined in red on your periodic table. Some are solids, the black ones, and then there is one liquid, bromine, which is outlined in blue. As far as density, as you guys remember, density is mass per unit of volume. Metals are generally fairly dense materials, whereas non-metallic elements are less dense. They have a lower density. Okay, in this problem we're identifying some mystery elements. First, it's said to identify a metalloid. It could be any of these that are in contact with the stair steps. So boron, silicon, germanium, arsenic, antimony, tellurium, polonium, all of those are acceptable as metalloids. As far as transition metals, these are generally referred to as the transition metals, the ones in groups 3 through 12. The alkali metals, that would have to be some element from group 1. Halogens would be elements from group 17. Let's see, an alkaline earth metal in period 2. So it's specific. So here are the alkaline earth metals. Okay, so it's the second group, but then it says in period 2. This is the second period. So the element they're speaking of is beryllium. Let's see, the noble gas in period 5. And so here are the noble gases. Excuse me. They are group 18. And so looking at the 5th period, this is the 5th period, the noble gas, that's going to be xenon. A member of the most reactive non-metal group. And so we have to find, okay, so the nonmetals are over here, and the most reactive ones are going to be the ones that are really close to having their octet. That's going to be a halogen, so some element out of group 17. Then members of the most reactive metal group. As you recall, earlier in the semester we watched the video with the reactivity of alkali metals, how they corrode instantly in air. When you put them in water, they start on fire. So it would have to be one of these elements, excluding hydrogen, but something from the alkaline earth metals, or excuse me, the alkaline metals.